Hi everyone, welcome along to the third webinar. Hopefully everybody can see the screen. It's really good of you to join us today. We're going international today, so we've got people from Slovenia and from Australia online to share some of their work with you. So the webinar will work as it usually does. If people want to ask questions, hopefully most of you know how to do that now. You'll see there's a little bar which says questions. If you click on there, you can type your question in, and Ines will come back to the questions once we've finished the presentations. If you've got any problems, you can also send a message lower down which says chat. And if you're having problems with the internet or you think you need some help, if you send a message, Ines will be there just to see if there's anything that we can do to help things work. And as usual, we'll send out all the slides and a link to the recording later today. And next week, we'll put it up on the website with information about the next webinar. So online today, we've got Andreja and Anja from Slovenia.
Hello.
And we've got Kate from Australia.
Hi.
And Ines.
Hi, everyone.
And myself, Nick. So this week we're gonna, this month we thought we'd look at things where it's more about how we need to be more person-centered in how we support people if we're going to help them get the lives that they want and they dream about. So Anja and Andreja are going to be talking a bit about the personal planning work they do with the people they're supporting in institutions in Slovenia and probably in Serbia and Macedonia, and some of their stories and experiences. And then Kate's going to be talking about good support, community support. It's one of the big challenges that we hear about lots, where people are saying it's great to move people out, but there's never the right support isn't there. So Kate's going to talk about some of the work that they do in Australia to support people. Both presentations fit together into personal planning and personal support, and hopefully this will help move things on. I know Andreja and Anja and Kate are happy to hear queries after if people have got questions. We'll share emails and everything later on in the presentation. So we will now go over to Andreja, and Andreja will share her screen and her presentation, and then Kate will speak, and then we'll have some questions.
Okay. Hello?
Hi. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, good. Me and Anja, we're gonna, as Nick already said, talk a bit about personal planning and how we use it in different deinstitutionalization projects that we had, and basically how did we do not only the personal plans but also the training and users and staff involvement in personal planning. So the method we're using personal planning is the method that was introduced in Slovenia by David Brandon, and it's one of many of those person-centered personal planning methods. But the main point I think is that it's based on these 4 principles of users' empowerment, they're being in control, so nothing can be done without them, and nothing can be made part of the plan unless the users agree to have it in their plan. Then the next principle is the right to make mistakes, which means that everything we do in personal planning is considered to be a bit of an experiment. So we have to try things out to see if they work, not upfront say that they're impossible. But also, on the other hand, it gets the professionals, in a way, acknowledges that they do make mistakes, but that they have to apologize for them and change the way their work is done. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a bit sick, so I'll be coughing a lot during this presentation. And the fourth principle is reflexivity and reflectivity, which means on one side that we have to think all over the time what we are doing. Are we always giving the user as planners all the power? Is all the power in their hands? Do they really have control over the process of planning and and implementation of the plan? But also the reflexivity to try things up, to see how they're working, and if there's a need to be changed, then to do it backwards, not just or forwards. Yeah. So we've used this personal planning method in many projects we've done in Slovenia, like in direct funding projects, in trying to close down some of our institutions and so on. But what we've done lately in the past 4 years is to perform also this training for people doing personal plans, both in Slovenia and then in Serbia and in a little bit in Macedonia, but that was more improvised. We'll be mainly talking about how the trainings were performed in Serbia and Slovenia. But basically, the idea of the whole training is that also the training has to be based on the similar principles to personal planning. So it has to have a dialogic approach. So therefore, the participants of the training have to be able to discuss things they're interested, to have the possibility to express their opinions, and it's not only about getting to know the method or how to write the personal plan, but it's also there needs to be a change of ideology and perceivement of users, especially when you do it in institutions when they usually perceive users as objects of their care instead of humans. So and you can't really do that with just preaching and telling people how things should be and teaching them about the social model of disability and so on, but there needs a bit of time and they need to have the possibility to talk and discuss their ideas with you. The other thing is that the training has to be on site, so it has to be based on a personal experience of each participant in personal planning. Therefore, one thing that we could see from this on-site training is that people don't really trust the trainers unless they show them that they're able to perform personal planning. So once I remember when we did the personal training in Serbia, when we were talking about users, that even users that we can't understand, that we haven't been talking to them for 20 years or so, are able to participate in personal planning. They obviously they didn't trust and believe us. That's true. But I was one for a whole day for 10 hours doing personal plans with women users from a ward of 200 women, which couldn't basically, none of them was speaking, and most of the time they were just lying on their beds. And while I was doing it, like 5 people were just watching me what I'm doing and learning. And then they had to get their own experience as well, start doing the personal planning, and then coming back to discussing how was it to do personal planning, how was it to follow all these principles, and where did we make the mistakes and what to correct. An important part of it is that the training is not just the training in the method but of personal planning, but it has to create some sort of an ethos of change, ethos of deinstitutionalization, if we say so. It's not enough that they try out the method and then they know how to do it, but it was important when we did trainings that we were together for a while with the training participants and the training performance, that we were sleeping in the same place so we could go for a beer in the evening and talk and discuss what happened and then question each other. And this made some personal links, but it also created a collective will to change things, especially in our countries. That's very important because we don't get, well, salaries don't motivate us, but yeah, this because they're always not high enough. But this having this feeling of being part of something important is something that can also give us a lot of motivation. The other innovation we didn't do before, but we started doing it after Serbia, is that we never do separate trainings anymore. But most of the trainings that we do, not only in personal planning, but also in other methods, is that we do them together for users and professionals. So that is an important point because they finally get to hear one another and show their experiences, and sometimes it's the first time that the staff really gets to hear users' opinion. Yeah, and another lessons we learned from all these trainings was that it's whenever we're trying to do the institutionalization, only learning and teaching personal planning is never enough. It has to go hand in hand with also other deinstitutionalization methods like social role valorization, risk analysis, transformation plans, teamwork, and all this has to merge together.
Yeah, so now I will tell something about Serbia and Slovenian experience. So when we started the project in Serbia, with the deinstitutionalization training sessions, there was not a lot of interest in deinstitutionalization and education at all. Actually, there was a fear in the air, and institution employees did not want residents to be relocated. So they had a lot of doubts and were uncertain of the outcome. And after the personal planning, they eventually came around to the idea, because the personal planning was not useful only for users, but also for employees in institution. In Čurug and Stara Moravica, where I did my research. And actually, through personal planning, a lot of users' wishes were heard. So, for example, employees didn't know users, they didn't know a lot about their families, about their foster families, and so on. And there was this woman that employees thought that she doesn't have anyone anymore. So when they started to do planning, they heard for the first time that her foster mother was still alive, and also her grandmother, and that she wants to visit them. So this was one example that showed that users were more comfortable and open with employees after formulating personal plans. So they become increasingly self-confident and reached out for more employees' help, and they also they are also aware of their rights, because employees were talking to them what kind of possibilities they have to move out, to go to their families, to live with them, and after that they were more aware of their rights. So in additional institution in Stara Moravica, where I also did my research, they told us that they got to know users more after personal planning. So when they started to live in houses, in group homes, they were really, they didn't know that users can cook, that they still remember how to cook, how to wash clothes, and so on. And what they didn't know was also what they like. So before the personal planning methods, they didn't know them at all. Usually institution bought 300 chocolates and 300 bags of crisps, for example, from the money that was in the institution account. So the money that was also meant for users' pocket money. because for them it was easier to buy the same snacks for all 300 people. And after planning, they also, like I said, tell them more what they want, and they did it like this. So they bought snacks that users want, not the same for all group. So after they started the personal plans, it was also easier to construct resettlement plans, because people had a chance not to only move into group homes, but also to return home where they lived previously. For this, it was necessary to get in touch with the families and explore the opportunities for users to return home, which was also good for the whole process of deinstitutionalization. And this year, in Slovenia, in our biggest institution, that has around 640 residents, and around 200 of them live in group homes. The students of master's degree program had a workshop cycle on personal planning, and we also did, each student did one personal plan with a user and also with one of the employee. So we organized workshops that include a review of the personal planning method, and also defining the planning process. We also reviewed that the plan and its review what the plan and its structure should be. And as far as the plan and structure are concerned, we could say that there was a visible deviation from personal planning as it should be. So it was evident in the implementation part of personal plan, because in Hrastovec, in this institution, they do personal plan but without implementation plan, so without action plan. This means that they don't define the task, the contractors who will be presented for a specific task. They do not foresee the necessary finances, and also they do not define any timeline of the task that should be done. So at the workshop, we talked with employees that said in the end that many plans would be better and a lot of changes would occur through them if personal planning in their institution also contained the implementation part. But when we ask why they don't do it, the answer was that there is a lack of time to do it, but somehow we saw that this was more or less the excuse that they don't do anything, because also other employees that were there and were trying to do something, they didn't have the support from other employees, co-workers, and also institution.
So what we, from these experiences of ours, what we could have seen is that, yeah, personal planning is a very important method, not only in order to change users' lives, but also the functioning of an institution who wants to transform into community services or close down. Basically, the first step that was done with personal planning is that users, that the staff got to know the users. They finally got the chance to perceive them as people with wishes, ambitions in life, and goals. And some things already while living in institution could change. For example, somebody found their mother that was lost, that was living somewhere in Bosnia and was lost for about 5 or 10 years. But also some personal planning also speeded up a bit the resettlements to the community, not in Hrastovec, but in Serbia, where there was an interest into moving. Yeah, personal planning supported that, and also the lives of users outside the institutions were much more personalized, and also you could see that the group homes were not the only form of alternative to institutions, but when somebody wanted to marry somebody from the village and got to live with that, that was part of the personal plan, and then it really happened. So that was it from our side.
That's great. Thank you, Andreja. That's cool. Lots and lots of lessons of an experience shared by people there. We're going to move on to Kate. If people have got questions, then please do send them in using that box. And we'll now hopefully pass seamlessly from Slovenia to Australia and welcome Kate.
Hi.
Yeah.
You got me?
Yeah, if you kick off your slideshow, there we go.
Can you see that?
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, hello everybody. So my name's Kate and I work at or for an organisation called AVIVO, and I also am the Australian coordinator for the Citizen Network. So either of them, I'll make sure that you've got the websites and the links to a bit more information about them. But so I'm going to be talking a bit about, I suppose, after planning, what life can look like for people. And AVIVO is a support organisation based in Western Australia, and we support over 3,000 people. And they are people who have a disability or who experience mental ill health or are older people and are requiring support. And you'll see on the slide, it says that we're one of the largest shared management providers in Western Australia. And that's a very particular way about how AVIVO works, but I'm going to cover that later on. So, but the kind of critical thing, and I suppose what keeps me working at AVIVO, is the guiding principle that they have that is really tangible in the organisation, which is we do what it takes. So we do what it takes to support people to live their lives in a way that makes sense to them. And sometimes I can tell you that that's a challenge. Sometimes that's a challenge to funders. Sometimes that's a challenge to our workers, but it's a principle that we keep hold of and we keep coming back to, particularly at times when it gets a bit tricky. So yeah, we do what it takes. That's our mantra. And our purpose, so AVIVO is very heavily invested and steeped in what we call citizenship. And if the word citizenship doesn't work for you, because we've certainly had some difficulty with that, then I would talk about what a good life looks like. So on the screen there, you may have seen this before. This is the 7 keys to citizenship that was developed by a friend, Simon Duffy, and a colleague, Wendy Perez. And what you can see in front of you are 7 areas that we know we need to pay attention to if we want to support both ourselves and other people to have a good life. And at different points in people's lives, different keys matter. So they're fairly straightforward. You know, they should apply to your life as much as they do anybody else's. So we'll start at the top. So love, people having relationships that matter, people having relationships beyond paid relationships. And I suppose what I've learned in the planning process and the design process around people, if we meet people who don't have anybody that's unpaid in their life or don't have any friends, family, any relationships, that for us is a really critical priority that we need to pay attention to first. So how do we help the person find people in their life beyond the system and beyond services? Then you go to freedom. So that should be fairly self-explanatory. You know, everybody wants choice and control in their life. I have personally worked with people who have found that a challenge to begin with. So people who may have experienced fairly significant trauma or who may have lived in institutions and aren't used to exercising choice and control. But we certainly, we start on the small stuff, and we believe that it's the stuff that makes life worth living. Money, so I will be talking a little bit about funding. So funding is really important, and it definitely can make a difference. But I suppose what we've learned is it's what you do with the money that makes a difference. I've met people who've got a significant amount of funding and have not got a very good life. And I've met people who've got a minimal amount of funding and have got a great life. So I suppose the older I get, the more cautious I am now around the money being the really significant factor. It is important, but it's not the main thing. Then we've got home, so everybody having a home of their own. AVIVO doesn't support anybody in a group setting. We don't have any residential facilities. We only support people in their own homes. And some people choose to have lodgers or people who live with them, but I'll talk a little bit about that. But we don't have any residential accommodation or any facilities for people. Everybody's supported in their own place. Help, so that's pretty straightforward, people giving and receiving help. And one of the things that I've learned, I've worked in human services since I was 16, and I'm 41 now, is that for many, many people, the kind of main focus has been to be what lots of people call a service user or a care recipient. And I suppose what we try to focus on is how can people contribute to others, because everybody has got something to give. Then life, I suppose that's the stuff that living a life that you choose. And like I say, sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge. You know, we work with people whose lifestyles can be tricky or complex, or can certainly be challenging to watch. So people who may have friends in their life that might not be the friends that I would choose for them, but we're fairly consistently determined to support people to live the life that they choose, not the one that we want for them. And then finally, which I think is probably the most important, is purpose. So people having meaning and purpose in their life, you know, what do people get out of bed for in the morning? And certainly I've learned that particularly people who've got big reputations around behaviour, what I've learned is I go looking for purpose first. So what has the person got in their life to kind of motivate them, drive them? And that's usually a place that's really limited or lacking. So that's the other area that we focus on. So that's our kind of guide and light, if you like. That's the stuff that we keep coming back to. What do we need to do to pay attention to what makes a good life, and working in partnership with people to figure that stuff out. Just really briefly, I've just mentioned the money. In Australia, we are lucky or unlucky, depends which way you look at it, that there has been a huge national transformation in human services, which is called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And that is a scheme that is allocating individual funding to people with a disability or people who experience mental health issues. So over the next 2 years, I think it is, 2 to 3 years, so it's been going for about 4 years in pilot phase. Everybody who is eligible will have an individual allocation. So that's really significant. You know, it's a really big step forward, I think, instead of block funding. But one of the things that I'm certainly learning, and this is from my experience in the UK as well as in Australia, that individual funding kind of drives a particular kind of behaviour. So what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing here in Australia, is the idea that once people get their own individual allocation, they go shopping for support and choose an organisation. And, you know, on one level, that's great because people have choice and control over who they want to support them. But on another, I suppose what I'm concerned about is that having some funding and being able to shop doesn't necessarily create a good life. So I feel like here in Australia, we're kind of caught between social justice and consumerism. And what we know, and, you know, if I go back to the keys, money is only one part of the picture. So how do we keep our eye on a good life, not just how you spend your individual funding? So that's the context that we're in here. So I'm going to just talk you through 3 points really that I think have been really useful to me as an individual practitioner, to my family members who have a disability and require support. And they are these 3 points. So the first one is where you start will shape where you end up. And that for me is a particular kind of way of working that we would call individually designed solutions. So how do we create a support system that works uniquely for you? And I'll talk you through that. The second is solutions that sit in the real world, not in human services. And certainly my experience has been the temptation to go back to human services or to rely on the system is really big. And I often find myself in situations that, that aren't community-based and I have to keep my eye on what is it we're actually trying to do here. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then the last is about support organisations being partners. So working together to help people develop and grow. So they're the 3 points. So I'll start with where you start has an impact on where you end up. So this is kind of one way of seeing it, really. I trained as a social worker, and on the left-hand side of your screen, my training has largely been focused on understanding people's needs and then finding supports or services that will meet those needs. And that's exactly where it's taken me when I've started the conversation with what are your needs. I've found myself going back to human services. I think we've changed the conversation to what's it going to take for you to live a good life. And you know, we call that the keys to citizenship, or what's it going to take to advance or enhance your citizenship. And that certainly takes us in a different direction to community solutions that support what people actually want to do. And I mean, I can't really emphasize enough the kind of golden question for me is what will it take to have a good life, instead of what support needs do you have, and what services, strategies can we put in place. That will take you in one direction. What will it take to have a good life will take you in another. This is just an example of a guy, just to illustrate this point about what will it take to have a good life. This is an example about a guy called Mr. Mandel. He had a degenerative condition, and he was fairly adamant. So he had a good budget in terms of funding available for his support. I think his support budget was based on having, I don't know, 8-9 hours of support a day. And when we met Mr. Mandel, we asked the question, what's it going to take for you to have a good life? And he talked about it was not okay for him to have support workers come in and support him, that what was really important to him was that his 3 kids, they were adult children who lived in the area, that they and his wife were people who supported him, that it was unacceptable to have strangers. So we then went to the next question, which is the same one. What will it take to make that work then? And what we ended up doing as AVIVO's role was to facilitate how that's going to work. So we supported the 3 kids and mum to figure out a roster that was kind of acceptable to everybody. We offered the family training, so in really critical parts of Mr. Mandel's support. There were some things about kind of manual handling. There was all kinds of things. So we offered the family training. And then the other thing that we did was Mr. Mandel also had another daughter who lived outside of Australia. And we, in partnership with the family, when we were asking what will it take for you to do this, there was a really strong suggestion that we would need a break. So Mr. Mandel decided to use some of his funding to fly his other daughter over to Australia to relieve the family. So they went to a retreat, a Buddhist retreat, and had a break while his other daughter supported him. So I'm telling you that example because I hope you can see that AVIVO as a support provider, we didn't actually provide any direct support. You know, that was not right for Mr. Mandel. What was right for him was that we facilitated what it would take for his support system. And that was exactly how we used his funding. So yeah, not buying any of our support. Another example is a woman called Julie, who has an intellectual disability and was, I suppose, recovering or on the process of recovery from some fairly significant childhood trauma. And Julie had had a number of different organisations over the years involved with her, who all supplied support workers or therapists. And by the time that I got to meet her and AVIVO got to meet her, she was pretty fed up with support organisations and she didn't feel like her life had moved on. We went back to the keys to citizenship and asked the question, what's it going to take for you to have a good life? And the kind of things that were really important to Julie was that because she'd experienced such significant childhood trauma, her relationships with family were pretty much non-existent, and she felt very lost in the world. She had a sister who had also experienced this abuse, who she'd lost touch with. And I suppose in conversation where we got to was that the things that are going to make a difference for her was relationships. So finding people in our life to love and to love her, to potentially reconnect with our sister. That was really important to her. And one of the ways that she chose to use her funding was to get support to look into her family tree. So she really wanted to see if there were other people in her family who weren't connected to her childhood that were potential opportunities for relationships. Through that process, she did find some other family members, some of them outside of Australia, some of them in Australia. And she used some of her funding to connect with them. So that was flights to go and see them. A mobile phone was really important because it's not easy to keep in touch with people when you don't have a phone. And the other thing that she did was to contact her sister and slowly but surely begin to develop a relationship with her. We also discovered this thing about purpose. You know, what is it that really matters in your life? What makes you get up in the morning? That the thing that she loved was gardening. She had a really small garden. She lived in social housing. She had a really small garden. And we asked the question, what would it take for gardening to be much bigger in your life and to feature much bigger in your life? And where she went with that, so she did have some support, and where she went with that was to grow, she was quite into organic gardening, to grow some fruit and veggies. And this was over a period of time. She used them to contribute to the local farmers markets. They have a lot of farmers markets here in Australia where people go and sell their produce. So that was really small steps. She's now an active member of the farmers market committee, and yeah, plays a vital role in keeping the farmers market going and supporting other people. And then the final thing that she chose to spend some of her funding on was coaching, and that was life coaching. So bearing in mind that this is somebody who she'd explored all of the human service therapists and human service strategies, and was just really keen to do what other people do in community, and that was to use the services of a coach. And there's no doubt about it, you know, that had nothing, AVIVO helped her find a coach, but it certainly wasn't one of our coaches. And that's had a significant impact on our life. So it's not focused on our mental health as such. It's focused on what is it going to take to keep our eye on a good life and yeah, having a full and meaningful life. So I hope those two examples just give you a sense of, if you go in with the kind of thinking that we've got support workers and we're going to build a team around you, I think that takes you in a particular direction. If you start in the place of what will it take for you to have a good life, I think you end up in a really different position. So for me, individual design is really critical. But equally, you can design people right back into human services. So I've seen that happen many, many times. You know, I'm starting to feel old, actually. Somebody who's been around person-centered planning for a really long time, and have watched people have plan after plan after plan and not much action. And I've also seen people living fairly isolated, not great lives, but they've got a great plan. So this image in front of you is a concept that was developed by a guy called Pete Ritchie, who used to run Scottish Human Services. And he talked about one of the things that's happened in human services is it's like we've created a parallel universe called SERVICELAND. And what you can see from that image that I'm trying to display is SERVICELAND kind of sits in the real world, but it has a lot less colour, and it operates in a way that can really exclude people. So some of the examples there on the screen, where people live, you know, where they spend their time, in segregated day centres, in, you know, special transport, just not in full colour of community. And one of the things that I suppose I've learned about SERVICELAND is that when it's in operation, it is really powerful, and it can disconnect people from their family, their peers, their communities. And I can think about that from my own family. My niece, our Jenny, has autism, and the way that over the years we've been able to get support for Jenny has been in segregated settings. So she went to a segregated school. She's had kind of segregated activities, But that wasn't the way that we wanted it to be. It was the way that the system would offer it to us. So it almost kind of destroys community connections, I don't know, before we've even started. Another factor is that community resources are kind of an add-on, not the centre of where we look. So if I require support to have a good life, I'd look at what's going on in my community, and that would be the place I'd start. I wouldn't look at human services. The other thing that Pete talked about in terms of Serviceland is our focus can get a bit lost. We can just focus on people's deficits or needs and not their most important things, which is their capacities and resources. And then the other thing is that there's a tendency in Serviceland for the people who have the most power to be the people who work there, not necessarily the people who are living there. So Serviceland, there's just some examples. I won't go through them, but that just gives you some examples that this is across all sectors. You can see Serviceland in operation. Services become the only solution instead of community. And I suppose one of the things we're really conscious of is to bear in mind Serviceland when we're designing supports with people. We start with the community in mind. Where would people in the real world go if they were trying to figure this stuff out? Okay, one of the other things that, with this kind of spirit in mind, that AVIVO do is something that we call shared living. And I just need to be really clear, this is not accommodation or group living. There's two different ways that we do it. So it's where somebody with a disability, let's just say, has their own home and are lonely and are keen to share their home with somebody. And they would look at a lodger or a co-resident, they would call it sometimes, or a co-tenant, and they advertise for a lodger. And that's really popular here anyway in Western Australia with students. So students looking for accommodation, and we have a lot of different ways to pay for that out of the person's funding. That can be anything from a tax-free reimbursement or free rent. So the student might move in and becomes the person's lodger and has free rent for that time. And the deal with that is that they offer a little bit of support. So that may be overnight support or, I don't know, some cooking support. So that's a really popular model here in Australia, here in certainly in WA. And then the other way that that can work is people who are out living in the community, like you or I, who may be looking for something more in their life or to contribute. They invite people to live with them. So there are certainly people that we support who have lived alongside families, for example, as part of their family for many years. And again, we have different ways of being able to pay and fund that. But it is certainly an option that is incredibly popular. But I can certainly give you more information about that, but it isn't the same as grouping people with a disability together. This is somebody choosing to invite a lodger to come and live with them, or choosing to go and live with a family or an individual. And what you'll see there is the economic benefits are significant, and the impact on people's lives, relationships are enormous. So yeah, that's a kind of another factor that we have here that helps people live the lives that they choose. And then finally, the third point that I just wanted to make is that what I think I've learned primarily from AVIVO is that if support organisations just see themselves as providers or suppliers of support, that'll be what we offer people. So that'll be what we sell people. That'll be what we end up designing around people. And I hope that the examples I've given you give you a sense of that's not the place to start, that I see an organisation like AVIVO being a support partner. And we don't know where that's going to take us. We don't know. Every time we do some individual design work with people, with a person, you know, what emerges as being the right support for them can be incredibly different to the next person. So we see ourselves as support partners. And I suppose our aim is to facilitate what it's going to take to have a good life. So facilitate possibility. One of the kind of critical aspects I mentioned before, that AVIVO is one of the largest shared management providers. So even where people we've had block funding for people, shared management is a way of developing a partnership where the person and us take different levels of responsibility. So we are partners with some people who choose to manage everything, including their funding, and they might also employ their own staff, and we are there to help them do that, advise them how to do that, and be the kind of backup if something should go wrong, or the advisor or the problem solver alongside people. So we have people at one end of the spectrum who manage everything, and we're their kind of quiet partner in the background. And we have some people who we manage everything and we'll employ their supports, but they tell us how they want that done. So they'll tell us the kind of adverts that they need, who we should be looking for, where we should be targeting, but we take the responsibility of that. And then we have everybody in between. So we are really passionate about shared management and the ability for people to take as much or as little responsibility for their supports, as long as they are directing those supports. So that's a really, certainly from my perspective, coming from the UK, that's probably one of the best initiatives I've seen here in Australia. It just offers so much flexibility and real control for people. So yes, again, I can tell you a bit more about, I can share more about shared management if you want me to. Here's just an example of a guy called Edward who was living in a group home, was incredibly unhappy, had an incredible amount of behaviour that was really damaging to himself and other people. And I think what emerged as being quite obvious was that he needed a different future. This was not the one that was working for him. And we did some design work, worked out what that was going to look like. That involved him getting his own home. It also involved having a lodger live with him. And one of the things that his family were pretty scared of was being responsible for everything, because they'd had experience of that in the past, and that they ended up, I think, exhausted if support staff didn't turn up. So we worked alongside them again as a partner, helped them develop a team around Edward, helped them I suppose create a culture around Edward that was the right one for him. We do a lot of team development work in AVIVO, and we see that as critical in terms of developing the right culture, developing everybody on the right page, making sure everybody's autonomous and has a say. So we worked with the team, got them set up, and as things started to work well for Edward, what we could sense was that Mum was willing to take a bit more responsibility. So over time, she's moved from you manage everything to I'm willing to take a bit more. And, you know, the other thing that I should say about shared management, when life gets a bit tricky, so for this particular mum, she'd take on a bit more responsibility, then something would happen and she would kind of hand it back over to AVIVO so she could focus on life, and then she might pick it up again. So it needs to be really fluid and an active partnership. The kind of final thing, I think I might be running out of time. So the final aspect that I thought might be useful to you is we have a particular way of exploring safeguarding. So we do work with people where risk is an issue, you know, that we need to consider how we support people to be healthy and well. And we have a process that is a partnership. So it's, you know, it's not rocket science again. Our focus is absolutely never to fix people or to change them. Our job is to understand them and figure out what's really important to them, and to figure out together what can we do that helps the person live in a way that's safe, but in a way that is their life and not one that we're dictating to them. And we end up in lots of interesting places using that process. But our bottom line is it's an active partnership. You know, we're not there to tell people how and, you know, the way they should live, but we have a respectful partnership. And I suppose what I've learned with this process is a respectful partnership does mean sometimes we challenge each other. You know, sometimes we say, I'm not sure about that. I don't know how comfortable I am with that approach. But it certainly is, it feels different, it looks different to my previous experience in organisations that says, no, we have a duty of care, you've got to do it like this. We absolutely see it as an active partnership. So again, I can send you more information about that if it would be helpful. So I suppose to kind of sum up really, we don't focus on, and it feels a long time actually since I've heard the word service user or consumer. We focus on citizens, so everybody is a citizen, and what will it take for you to live a good life? We do think the language matters. We do think it places people in a particular way, or it places people in a way that shapes how we see them. So we're really focused on citizenship. We do believe that people, everybody is the expert on their own life. And if we don't respect that, we end up in a dodgy place, really. It doesn't work. We've learned it. We do think that all of our supports should be based on what a good life could look like for you. And that's the aim of our support, is to enable that or to support that. I do think resources are important, and everybody should know what resources are available and how best to spend them. And like I say, you know, there are times when people choose to spend their funding in a way that I would not necessarily choose, but I can't override that if I truly believe that people are the experts in their own life. And I suppose alongside that, that kind of couches all of this, is what I've already talked about, which is an active partnership, that we are a support partner, not a supplier or provider, and that our role is to sit alongside you on your journey whilst you're in control. Just really briefly, the other thing that we've learned over the last couple of years is citizenship is as important for our staff. And we asked our staff, so we have over 1,200 staff, we asked them, what would it take for you to have a good life at work? And these are some of the factors that came up, and I won't go through them, but they won't be a big surprise to you. But what's interesting is this is what the staff told us. It's slightly different words, but it's the same stuff. And of course it is, because if this is the stuff that makes a good life for people, it's a good life for everybody. So we're doing quite a lot of work now looking at how do we support and enhance the citizenship of our staff, because their job is to support and enhance the citizenship of everybody else. So yeah, if anybody's interested in that, I'm more than happy to either come back on or to share what we're doing. But I just wanted to put that in there because it's had such a big impact on our way of thinking and of our way of being with people. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Are you there, Nick?
That's great. Thanks, Kate. It's really good. Really good to get perspective from around the community-based support, which I think we've talked about lots on other webinars, where it's one thing helping people move out, but it's another actually getting them the real support they need to live in the community and live independently.
Yeah.
I'm just going to change the screen. Hopefully it'll go to me, and we will go to questions. So has anybody got any questions? And I'll pass it over to you, Ines.
Thank you, Nick. So, and thank you to the presenters as well. So actually, it's more of a comment from Camille from Greece. And it's to Andreja and Anja, so about their experience from Slovenia. And I'll add to Camille's comment by myself as well to explain it a bit. So the question is about some of the solutions presented. You talked about in the presentation. So basically, what happens? You know, you do person-centered planning with people in institutions, but then, you know, some of them will end up in group homes, which at least according to Enel is not a good, you know, is not a good solution. So what happens when people, you know, actually they express what they want in life, and you know what their future should be, but the options are very limited. You know, how do you then reconcile those two things, basically, because it's not as if you know, the system is able to respond to whichever way people see their future. And the second part of the comment was about Camille said that in his opinion there should always be a disabled person in the team, you know, doing the training. So somebody in the role of a peer supporter, or somebody you know, who's perhaps had experience of institutionalization themselves. So maybe you can comment on that, Andreja or Anja, and then I'll go to the other question which just came in from Maria, or it's a comment as well. Andreja and
Lisa.
Anja? Mm-hmm.
Go for it.
I'm just waiting for Andreja.
Yeah.
Okay, here you are.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just want to. One thing is that yes, users are usually involved as trainers. That's not an issue. That it's not, but maybe we didn't mention it. Because usually there's when we do things, it's usually that everyone's involved is trainers, professionals, academics, users, and students. So we do it all across, and the participants of the training are both users and professionals. The other thing is, yes, some of the stuff that is done after we do the personal planning training might not be. People might not end up in totally independent living, but sometimes I believe you have to be pragmatic. So in a way, yes, group homes are small institutions and are not suitable places for people to live in. But in situations when you need to change institution, when you need to try to do something to change the way institutions are, to get them on board to do transformation, because of course it in our countries, in Serbia, Macedonia, and Slovenia for sure, will never get the government to do decide by themselves to do the institutionalization and perform it. But you need everyone, the NGOs and the institutions on board, and you need to work with them somehow, and you have to do something. And the thing is that very often when plans are made, that people's life change in the way they want, and people do. Of course, not all the 640 people that live in Hrastovec, we were not able to resettle them all, but quite a lot of people during these years, while we were introducing personal planning, were resettled and went to independent living. And also in Serbia, some of them went to a group home temporarily, and then they moved on to independent living. But yeah, yeah, it's somewhere in between, and we navigate through what we can do. We can either decide to do nothing and leave them do their life and be just activists, which we are quite often, or we have to engage somehow with the institutions and try to change the life of the users. Because obviously the NGO sector also is not much better usually than the institutions. They quite often just accommodate users with marginal needs, and they don't really advocate for the institutionalization.
Thank you. Did you want to add something, Andreja?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for this explanation. I think yes, it's about just to summarize. It's about doing something and starting something, starting to get people out when you don't have the support either of the government or the institutions themselves for the process. So thanks for that explanation. Then we have a couple of comments. Well, Maria from Slovakia just says, thanks to Kate for the inspirational presentation. That was perfect. And then Ian says he has worked in services in England for 6 years. And he says that everything Kate says is wrong with the services is happening in England. He says workers with no experience or knowledge telling people they support what to do all the time. And basically, he says one senior worker's mantra is they've got to learn. So he just comments on how terrible the situation is, and maybe there's a question in there, Kate, on what to do. Well, it's a big question on what to do.
I mean, I suppose, Ian, I'm with you because I've also worked in and around those services, and you know, there's part of the reason why I kind of threw it in at the end, because I really wanted to talk about it. But the thing about really thinking about what it takes to create a good life for staff, I think is way more critical than we've paid attention to. So if people in the workforce feel disempowered, if people in the workforce don't know what it is to have a good life themselves, to know what it is to be autonomous, to have purpose, to have meaning, then I think it's fairly incredible that we're asking those people to support others to do it. And there's been a few things in this last, couple of years that I think have really hit me, and I'm probably ashamed to say it actually, because I've worked in human services, like I say, since I was 16. But by not paying attention to who those people are, what matters to them, how we create organizations and environments that work with their skills and work with their strengths, then I think we will never deliver very good supports and services to people. I remember when I think I was about 18, 19, and I think it was Goffman or Wolfensberger who talked about people who are devalued themselves and the impact that has on them then supporting other people. And I certainly know in the UK and in Australia, support work is not very well paid. It's not necessarily well regarded. So how do we as organizations, champion these people and help people see that they are as valuable as anybody else? And I completely agree with you, Ian. I haven't seen that happen very well. And I don't think it's necessarily something that organizations pay attention to, but it certainly in AVIVO has taken us on a very different journey. So yes, sadly, I'm with you, and I don't know what the full answer is, but I know it lies somewhere in how we treat each other. I hope that's of any use whatsoever.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I think that is great, and I know in a lot of the countries there is a lot of resistance from the staff as well, and the trade unions to moving people from institutions into the community. So knowing, I think it was useful to hear your thoughts on this. We don't have any questions here anymore. Nick, did you want to ask something yourself, maybe?
Well, I guess I think it's Andreja and Anja were talking about the training, and it's kind of for Andreja and Anja, it's about what are the most important things that help people get the idea, because you did talk quite a lot about that. And I guess the question for Kate is, I think you've answered it. It's the simplicity of it's having a really simple question about what would it take. Because my question to Kate was going to be, what was the most important thing? And I think you've answered it in what would it take to have a good life. And how that's a much more important question than lots of the ones that we have to ask when we're professionals. So I think in this that both Anja and Andreja and Kate have answered the questions I was going to ask.
Okay, thanks. I thought so too, yes. I thought you wanted to add, but in the meanwhile, Lily from Bulgaria, she sent a question, and it's for Andreja, and she is asking whether Andreja can give more suggestions about how to overcome resistance of staff and the authorities. I don't know, Kate, if you do have to. Kate said she would have to leave us at some point. So
I've got about 5 minutes. So
okay, that's great. So we're happy to if you stay a bit longer.
Okay.
But, thank you, Andreja. Do you want to answer Lily's questions, please? Lily's question, please. How do you overcome resistance?
well, we have quite a lot of experience in that, especially you could see that in Serbia, in this pilot institution where we did a lot of work. One of the things helps is being there a lot. So we've spent living in this institution all together now, well, when we were for about almost 3 months. That's one of the things, being there a lot, make good example, chat, we have a plan of training, of all different trainings, show them that you really can work together with the users, that it is possible, have a lot of small chats with the staff. And one of the main things probably that show that, because most that is opposite to it are the nurses and the frontline staff. So one of the things that is often quite hard for academics or people training to be social workers or social workers and defectologists we have in these countries is very hard to work really as a team with the frontline staff. So what we do quite often is to help them with the nappy changing, feeding the users, helping them with the showers, all this dirty work that they do. And then they can see that you really are ready to do much more. You're ready to risk your status in a way. You're ready to risk your time and life for this. So that's one of the things. And then they take you more as an equal. They start talking to you, and that gives more opportunities. Discuss the questions and the fears they've got, because it's mainly what you see at the end is that it's mainly a fear of losing their job. This staff is usually very poor, dependent on this salary. Sometimes they're the only wage earners at home. So yeah, this is one of the things that helps overcoming. Lots of training, giving them responsibilities, start up a project-oriented organization, which means that some of the projects can be a personal planning, but a plan can be also to organize going out picking mushrooms with the users. And some of the stuff, when we gave them the responsibility to implement part of a personal plan, for example, they said, this is the first time in my life that somebody gave me something to do. I always just had to follow the instructions that came from above. So taking responsibilities, showing them how it's possible to work differently, getting them to, when you take the users outside the institutions, when you cut the barbed wire and these sort of things, taking some of the stuff out with you so they get to go out of the unit where they work is a good thing. We organized lots of manifestations also outside when people came and asked them. But also what we noticed is that when it's one of the breakthrough for the staff is seeing how people live outside. So I don't know, when in Serbia, in this institution, Čurug, there was this first group home opened for 4 people. And until that happened, everyone was scared. Yeah, they were scared of letting the users go outside of the institution. Nobody had the permits to go out, to go in the village. Only a few users, maybe 1% of them were allowed to leave the institution. But when they saw this, how these people live outside, they thought more people should live like that, and that their work would be better if they worked all the time outside, not just closed on the wards. Of course, it's not for everyone like that. Yeah, some people didn't change, but mostly they do. And these are somehow you can do it, but you have to, get their trust and prove them and show show them that other ways of working are possible. Because if you just talk on how it should be and without showing them, they don't believe you. Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think we don't have any other questions, Nick.
Okay. Kate had to go. She's just sent me a message to say that she's had to go, but we'll kind of say a big thank you to Kate as well for her time. I will put people's, there is a gap there. That was, yeah. I will put people's emails on here so that when you get the presentation and the slides later, you'll have everybody's contact details. I know that Kate's very happy to talk more to anybody who wants to talk about what she was saying, and Andrea and Anja are the same. We'll send out everything to everybody on our mailing list later today, and would, you know, please do share this with everybody. So if there's other people that you think might be interested, or you've got a group that might like to listen to the recording and follow the slides, then please use it as much as you can, because that's kind of how we're working this, of keeping it free and open to everybody. The next webinar is going to be on Friday the 27th of April. We're going to be hopefully joined by Steve from the USA. We're going to have to change the time probably, so we'll tell you about that next week, because obviously that would mean that Steve would be up in the middle of the night. We'll also be hearing from Jamie and Anis about the network that exists up in the north of Europe, and some ideas about how we might be able to make this network work more. And we'll send out the links and everything from people later today and next week with our next newsletter. If people have got any queries about the webinars, or would like to take part, or have anything to share, we really, really like it if people send us emails with links or information or documents, and we'll share it out with everybody through the network. We've had a couple of things, and it's worked really well to do that. So please do share. And it's just saying that we've got about 20 different countries represented now. It's really a coalition of people, so it's up for you all to kind of help us make this happen. So we really welcome it if you can tell people about what we're doing and share the information and stay involved. And we really look forward to hearing you on our next webinar. So just a big thank you to Andreja and Anja in Slovenia for their input around personal planning. Looking forward to seeing you guys soon. And we will share this later on today. So I'm going to click the stop button. Is there anything else anybody wants to say? Maybe a goodbye from Slovenia, or a goodbye from Ines?
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Take care, everybody, and enjoy the weekend when it comes. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.